Students, the next topic in the Unit 3 syllabus is free trade agreements. And this dot point here is the overall role and features of free trade agreements. And the two specific free trade agreements in the syllabus are the ASEAN Australia-New Zealand Free Trade Agreement, which is a multinational one, meaning lots of countries involved, and Australia's first free trade agreement, which was the ANZCERTA, or the Australia-New Zealand Closer Economic Relationship Free Trade Agreement. So free trade agreements in general are treaties between one or several countries that aim to reduce or remove barriers to trade in goods, services and investment. So why do countries, or what is the overall role of free trade agreements, is to increase international trade. Because the general argument in economics and in business and by governments is that when you reduce barriers to trade, it stimulates trade, which leads to greater employment and economic growth in the country, which basically increases people's standard of living. It allows for businesses and consumers also to benefit from having a wider range of competitively priced imports, which for a business can reduce its costs of production. However, that comes with some disadvantages as well, which is really the next syllabus point. So what are the features of free trade agreements? Well, generally it's a reduction in tariffs or quotas or other forms of government interference in the market. Also, it could be to do with simplified customs procedures. It could be trade in services which are reformed. It could be to do with the movement of people and or workers in and out of a country. It could reduce barriers to investment as well. So depending on the relationship between countries involved, the features of free trade agreements will be different. So the first and easy one for you to understand is the ANZCERTA. So in previous marking keys in the WACE exam, the term features has been described poorly, I think, in the marking keys. My understanding, and I think the examiner's understanding of the word features now, are elements of the agreement which facilitate trade. So the first one for the ANZCERTA is that there is no tariffs on goods traded between Australia and New Zealand. Now, the next sentence you can see there is really, really important, because I would always suggest, even if the question doesn't ask, that you explain why that's good. And in this case, it allows Australian businesses to export to New Zealand at a competitive price point. There's no tariff which is added on to increase the price in that market. You can sell it for the most competitive price that you wish to. The second one is the harmonisation, or harmonisation means basically to make things the same, of Trans-Tasman food standards. So if you don't know, the Tasman Sea separates Australia and New Zealand. That's why it's called Trans-Tasman. And so basically then if you produce something in Australia, you can be guaranteed that the standards by which you need to test and generate your product are going to be also accepted in New Zealand. So what does this mean? It means that your packaging costs can be reduced, because you can effectively scale your production for both countries. And that process of testing and ensuring that your product for food meets the requirements as designated by the government are going to be the same in both countries. Again, they're reducing your costs of production. The last one is the mutual recognition of skills and qualifications, meaning that if I am a teacher in Australia, I can, after I apply to the local teaching body in New Zealand, my teaching degree will be recognised. So this allows for a larger pool of labour to aid in overcoming skills shortages in Australia. And we know that we have skill shortages in a range of industries, which can benefit from this aspect of the agreement. The next one is a little trickier. Often is a little harder to understand, because some of the features are a little difficult, or more difficult than the ANZCERTA. And a common mistake is that students do mix up the features, and so figure out a way to not do that, because you'll get a 0. So it's worthwhile to understand that ASEAN is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. Now, this is not a feature, this is just background. And there's a range of countries that you can see there which are involved in that collective block of countries. The three features which I think, now there's about six that you could talk about, but the three I think which are easiest to explain. The first one is that, again, it's a reduction in tariffs on 90% of goods traded within the free trade area. And again, this gives, that reduction in tariffs allows Australian goods to be traded at a competitive price point in all those markets through the ASEAN region. The second one, which will benefit Australian business as well, is the facilitation of customs procedures, which allows our products to move through countries in ASEAN a lot quicker and potentially with less obstruction and ultimately cheaper, giving greater certainty to your overseas customers that your good will be there on time. The last one is barriers to trade in services, which will be liberalised, meaning that barriers will be reduced, allowing access to service suppliers. So what does this mean? Well, it means that Australian businesses potentially could outsource more of their non-core elements of production to the region. So I think more commonly here of things like call centres, I think of service outlets as part of the business, I think of other IT sort of cloud-based elements of a business can be outsourced to the region, therefore reducing costs of production for Australian business. I haven't written a model answer for this one, but I just wanted to point out something, a bit of a trend for this question in the last few years. So you can see here that the question has not really been a higher order question. In 2024, all you had to do was identify, so recognise and name a feature of the ASEAN Australia New Zealand Free Trade Agreement, and that you just wrote them down, pretty easy. The next was a describe, so you just had to go in a little bit more detail, but again, only 2 marks for each feature. And the last one was state in 2021. Again, the main points. So in no way in the last few years did you have to link it to a case study. Did you have to, explain or comment? Pretty simple questions if you are well and truly on top of your content. So who knows? You can see it's also a question which is very popular with the examiner, being asked 3 times in a number of years. Maybe this year you'll get a year off, but you can never guarantee that. So that's free trade agreements and the 2 specifically which you need to know for the course.